you've been a very, very harsh critic of Benjamin Netanyahu, and I have my own problems with Bibi Netanyahu since 2002 when he came over to the United States and spoke before Congress and made a very impactful speech urging our country to invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein. And that turned out to be, as many of us predicted at that time, the worst foreign policy blunder in American history, arguably. And I was very, very critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu on the censorship issues and the judicial reforms. I'm very proud of Israel's judiciary system. I think it's the best judiciary system in the world, and I think those reforms were going to undermine it. But talk about about how you see Netanyahu in terms of the peace process. Is he an impediment to the peace process now with Gaza?
He's a monumental impediment to peace, well, to an end game of any kind in Gaza. And he has, for his entire career, done all he can to impede efforts to bring about a two-state solution whereby the West Bank and Gaza are hived off of Israel and become a state in their own right. Netanyahu is really a fascinating figure, I have to tell you, Mr. Kennedy. He may be the most classic example, the most profound example in the world today of how seeming intelligence, how the artifice of intelligence, eloquence, and the ability to articulate and to look good and sound good on TV sometimes has nothing to do with wisdom. Everything about Netanyahu's strategy is basically bad for Israel. I realize that sounds extreme, and for me, as someone who values a degree of journalistic, remove, not dispassion, but objectivity for sure. It's tough to talk about Netanyahu because his impact on Israel has been so horrific. His government is so outrageously incompetent and reckless, and I don't know. I mean, it borders on the crime against the country. So I guess the answer to your question is yes. Specifically in Gaza, there is a theory that will sound like a conspiracy theory, but as you may agree, some of them are true. And the theory says Netanyahu's trying to prolong the war because of a paradigm that he's built, where he said, yeah, sure, a government that failed as spectacularly as we failed on October 7th generally resigns, but now we're in a war. And for as long as there's a war, we got to put politics to one side. Well, that argues for continuing the war for a long, long time. And there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that they're going slow in the war to prolong it. And they have refused time after time certain actions that would have enabled an endgame. This is the great tragedy of Netanyahu. His eloquence he has been able to ride his eloquence to a career that has done Israel untold damage. And I fear we're approaching the point where it's fatal. If this cabal stays in power somehow, another 5-10 years, I'm predicting Israel will not exist by 2048. And it's a little sad because it's worth preserving. And if there ever was peace, and if the kinds of attitudes in Jewish and Arab Israel that I think God and I represent were allowed to flourish, it could be one of the finest countries on earth. It really could.
You're talking about Israel.
Yeah, Israel.
What's the future? I'll ask you first, Gada, and then Dan. What's the future of Gaza?
They have to find, even though on the Palestinian side, in West Bank and Gaza, new leaders, also peaceful leaders that think about the future of the Palestinian and the West Bank. It's very difficult how many years Gaza have to build themselves. And, we are talking about more than 40,000 victims, children, women's, regarding what's happening in the current war. And I think that's it's. I think that they have to think really. This should be the past point that they have to change all the map and thinking ahead of the future of these children's and women's, and even though for the local Palestinians in this area. I don't think that Netanyahu will lead the place for better future or better things in humanity, or think about Netanyahu destroy everything. I just look for new leader even in Israel. And I suppose, with your permission, something that we know that United States has an important role and influence, even though to move the Middle East and especially our region to better place, and even though to peace around us. And I think not almost they do the same, their ill efforts to do that. If we are talking about our current situation, it's very threatening, and even though complicated more and more, and we have to do all together, and the leaders even though in Arab countries and in all over the world have to work immediately about how to improve the situation, because I think that with Hezbollah open and with they're almost done, and even every day we face the same problematic and complicated situation, and Netanyahu feels that his performance is well, and nobody can change that, unfortunately.
Dan, you've written a lot about the corruption of the Netanyahu regime, the financial corruption, which you say is worse than any government in the history of Israel, and is really noteworthy around the world. But there's tremendous corruption also in the West Bank, and almost as much in Gaza, financial corruption. Plus, you have leadership that has not built institutions like courts, regulatory agencies that are robust, that could serve, that can provide stability to a nation, the backbone to a nation. And you have you have these pretty outrageous commitment to violence on both by the governments of the West Bank and Gaza, where there's a pay-for-slay program that offers any citizen who murders a Jew, man, woman, or children, a bounty, and pays lifetime annuity to people who kill Jews, where streets are named after Jews.
Not exactly. The pay-for-slay thing is basically what's called pay-for-slay. Basically means the Palestinian Authority does pay stipends to Palestinians who are in jail, in Israeli jail. And that includes Palestinians in Israeli jail for murder. So the Israelis will say, well, that's pay for slay. The Palestinians say, we're in a as Gaza says, harsh and complex situation, and we just got to do this if they're in Israeli jail. I wouldn't compare to the West Bank government, which, sad to say, is a fairly typical Arab world police state with corruption. Not too impressive, but not the worst thing in the world, like North Korea, to the situation in Gaza, which is just radioactively evil. You have a jihadi, a militia, imposing a theocracy on the people of Gaza, brainwashing the youth for martyrdom and for never-ending fight against Israel, provoking a neighboring nuclear power with the express purpose of getting it to react or overreact so the Palestinians are killed because they find some profit in that, and they call it martyring. Hamas is so demonic, so absolutely satanic that I simply I apologize for cutting you off, but I have to say there's a real difference between them and the Palestinians in this bank. And as for Israel, look, Israel's a proper democracy. I don't want to sound like a propagandist and explain why and how an Arab judge in Israel put away an Israeli Jewish prime minister and a Jewish president and sent them to jail, and Arab judges oversaw the last elections, and Ghada and I have the exact same rights. Israel is a democracy for all its problems, and there are problems for sure. But the Netanyahu government flirts with illegitimacy in a variety of ways. And if you ask for the financial corruption, well, the Israeli state has put him on trial on 3 counts of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. And it would have once seemed incredible that you are on trial for bribery and you're still clinging to power by your fingernails. And they cannot be prized off your, and everyone thought he would resign when the charges were tabled. But we're living in an era where if something's illegal, it can be done. The fact that it's just not done no longer matters. So, you find it being done. I can't tell you if he's guilty or not of corruption, but it's not a good look. And there's a 4th charge involving submarine sales that has already sent Netanyahu's aides to prison, and he's somehow denying he was involved. It's just beyond belief, beyond belief. And that explains why you mentioned the judicial reform before. That explains why they try to Putinize the country. The so-called judicial reform that was meant to, you put it very politely, Mr. Kennedy, you said to undermine Israel's excellent judiciary. Wasn't undermining. They proposed for the government to appoint all the judges, have them be puppets, and should the puppets forget to be puppets and become uppity, to have the parliament be able to overrule judges by majority vote, right? So that means the government controls everything.
If the banning of Al Jazeera was kind of it was a step that a lot of people agree with in Israel, but it's really a violation of the tradition in Israel for freedom of the press. Dan, how did you react to that?
Well, full disclosure, I sometimes appear in Al Jazeera, but that has nothing to do with my view on it, which is it's not only a violation of the tradition of freedom of press in Israel, it is a violation of the tradition that Jews are not completely stupid. This was a very unintelligent move. It achieved nothing. If Al Jazeera spreads poison, they're still spreading poison. The only place they're not spreading it is in Israel. And the Israelis don't care. They don't watch Al Jazeera. This prevents Al Jazeera from doing reporting in Israel and occasionally bringing across to the Arab world the Israeli side. Now, they're not a Zionist outlet, and they're certainly borderline hostile to Israel for sure. And you could even argue they're not just supportive of Hamas, they're maybe enabling Hamas. And Qatar, of course, has something to do with funding Hamas. All that is true, but they're not completely unprofessional. And they would occasionally bring across the Israeli side. Now they can't do that. So what have you achieved? You make yourself look like Russia. You prevent them from reporting on the Israeli side, which they sometimes did. You don't prevent them from reporting from the Palestinian side, because that's not Israel. So they're still there. It has literally achieved nothing. It has only done damage to Israel's reputation as a democracy. And not just that, it's more than Al Jazeera, because to enable that, they passed a law, this reckless, almost unpatriotic government passed a law that allows them to shut down anyone on charges of national security, on suspicion of violation of national security. And as everyone knows, who knows anything about history, the violation of the enemies of the state argument is the last refuge of the scoundrel and of the authoritarian. It's disgraceful. And then I say that knowing very well that the station is hostile to Israel, but freedom of speech is measured precisely when you don't like the speaker. It's easy to favor free speech when everyone's in agreement. So that's my answer to that. It's disgraceful.
How about you, Gada?
Regarding, with your permission, I just want to relate for when we talk about the democracy. I think that our current government and also Netanyahu, they destroy even though the basics, humanity rights of democracy. When you, I think that Dan, you note that after the 7th of October and what happens, the murder, what actually they did, even if I'm as an Arab Palestinian citizen want to convey my own opinion on my own feeling with what happens with the children in Gaza, they took all of us to prison. Many of the academic students, even though they have problematic with integrating the workforce and even though the academic in the universities. A lot of changes, unfortunately. When I asked my mom, she told me, look, it seems like back many years ago.
I mean, I was engaging in perhaps a journalistic quibble. It's not yet destroyed, but it's very bad. The right wing, the right religious coalition in Israel, currently, very sadly, in power, clinging to power, despite being very unpopular at this point. They don't have democracy in their DNA. They certainly don't have liberal democracy. Their version of democracy is dictatorship of the majority. And once they have a majority, they will try to engineer a permanent majority. It's a Putin version of democracy. Israel is really an interesting case. I said before that if Gada and I were allowed to run the country, it would be among the best places. It has tremendous successes. Israel, in 2002, before before Netanyahu was elected, he was elected towards the end of that year, had a higher per capita GDP than Germany, Britain, and France. This is not an unsuccessful country. It punches way above its weight in so many things. Technology, Nobel Prizes, literature. It's just, it could be great. But it's self-destructive. And the self-destruction is happening because of very particular people. The right religious coalition and their base and their supporters. So that's it's quite a dichotomy. I mean, which way it goes, nobody knows. Well, I can't predict. But I know that a very big storm is coming.
I think that we have to work together. We don't have to wait for somebody to bring the peace. We have Jews as Palestinians work together hand by hand. I'm not optimistic, but I think,
sure,
how I mentioned in the beginning, it's very difficult for me to neglect my own history and what happens to my grandpa and father, and part of them, left the land. But I just look for my children and the future of my children. That's enough. I think that we have to work together and not let people like Netanyahu and other racism sides just to move the region or the place for and destroy it. We have to think about better futures, and we just not wait for anyone to think about it. We have just to work hard, and we can do that. And it's impossible. We can say in one hand we can say that it's not easy to do it, but we can succeed to do it, I think, if we want to do that.
No one can disagree. And I believe that's what we actually try to do. I would add, it's so complex and difficult that we need, Israel needs help from its friends, American friends in particular. It's critical. There's a lot the Americans can do to ease the process, to provide global leadership and regional leadership. And my sense is, Mr. Kennedy, that if you are elected in November, you would. I think you know this very well.
What should America be doing right now? What should the U.S. president be doing right now?
First of all, the U.S. president should not display such weakness vis-a-vis outrages happening in the region, like the Houthis blocking. It's not just Israel-Palestine. I find the Biden administration, like much of the liberal world, doesn't really carry a big stick. I'd carry a bigger stick. I'd carry that big stick with the Houthis, with the Iranians, with Lebanon and Hezbollah, where what's going on is an outrage, with Netanyahu, with Hamas and the supporters of Hamas. I would lay down the law. And instead, they're running around trying to persuade a bunch of miscreants to not spit in their face. I find it pathetic.
What do you mean what's going on with Hezbollah? I mean, Hezbollah, what do we do about Hezbollah? And this could so easily trip into a world war. It's very, very...
Absolutely. Yeah.
And as you say, I think nobody's really talking about the reality that this is existential for Israel. Israel could disappear. This is the first time that people have entertained that thought for a long time, that... And then what happens? I mean, the Palestinians then are come under control of Iran, and that's not good for them. What happened? Do we we need to contemplate a world without Israel. And, is that, what is that world going to look like? And so I interrupted you. Let's just talk a little bit.
But I can't disagree with what you said. Clearly, my long-term strategies and short-term strategies is in the direction of peace and partition of Israel into Israel as it currently stands and a Palestinian state probably. But in any case, no longer Israeli occupation of the West Bank or Gaza. But I do think Israel's legitimate concerns on the security side need to be addressed. The West Bank is really, really close to Israel. It comes within 30 miles of Tel Aviv or less, surrounds Jerusalem on three sides. And should that fall under the control of Hamas, you're looking at a very big problem. So that is not paranoia on the part of the Israelis. That's a legitimate concern. I think the U.S. has kind of left Israel and the Palestinians and all their variants and the region to their own devices because of a combination of Trump's isolationist instinct and transactionalism and Biden's, and in general, the left liberal side's, not indifference, but reluctance to impose anything on anyone. They're always talking. And I think this region needs help. It needs a very tough love to get to somehow engineer this future where this partition is possible. And you're right, you can't just blunder into Lebanon and have World War III, because it really could. There's a series of domino-like tripwires where that could happen. But on the other hand, the U.S. should make very clear, I think, to France and to the government of Lebanon that this is in no way acceptable to have the territory of Lebanon being used by a militia that's larger than the army of Lebanon to fire rockets at a neighboring country. And by the way, the Galilee, which is taking the brunt of the rockets, half of it is Israeli Arabs. I mean, it's insane. And that this is somehow treated as a reasonable thing, and Amos Hochstein goes around like trying to get someone to talk to him, and no clear statement is made, I don't think is necessarily good.
And God, should we
just want to say, yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead, God.
I just want to say regarding the question about what we expect from the United States. I'm so disappointed, sorry to tell that, for what happens or the reaction of the United States government nowadays of dealing and all the what happens around Gaza and our war in our region. How I mentioned before that I expect from United States as a country, move the place for better and peaceful worldwide, especially in our region. I think in order to make this place more safety or more, for a long term, just peace. And when I said peace, that's give both states for both peoples, because if you want to just to talk with Lebanese and talk with Syria and other, the safety will come after we'll give the Palestinians their own states. How to give it, where to give it, I don't discuss this point now, but I think the solution for long term to bring to transfer all the hatred or transfer all the complicated reality here to be more safety and more calm here. I think just we have to work to bring or to recognition in the Palestinian states.
Here are two things the U.S. could do. The U.S. could tell Qatar not another dollar goes to Hamas. Otherwise, there will be consequences. And the U.S. can tell Netanyahu not another settler goes to the West Bank. Not one, or there will be consequences. I don't want to talk to you. I'm not sending Hochstein. I'm not sending Blinken. I'm telling you, I'm your big friend. Everything will continue as is, but not one more settlement. Lay down the law. Is it out of respect for Israel's democracy that it doesn't do this, or Qatar's democracy? It's out of weakness, and it's enabling bad faith players to run riot. So I guess in different ways, you're getting the same answer from both myself and Gada, which is the U.S. needs to be involved. Should be.
Gada, final words.
I believe that all the time. They tell me, Rada, you're all the time optimistic. I think that I should be like that in order to think about my children's future and my children's future. And even though if all the time I will evoke memories and just back to the past and to the history of my family, it's destroyed my dreams. I don't want to think about destroying dreams. I want to look ahead and to look at the reality through my eyes and try to change the reality for best future and healthier future. So I think we should be sometimes optimistic at work, to be optimistic, work hard in order to to be optimistic also.
Ghada Zawabi and Dan Perry, thank you very much for joining us on the Path to Peace.